Standing up in McKinney, this is According to Callus. Today we're going to speak a little bit about what's been going on in Texas, how that relates to the federal government, and what we're doing right and what we could do better. But before we get to that, let me remind you, the big ask I have for you is to like, share, subscribe, follow, all those good things. But in addition to that, what I really need is for you to tell your friends. It's not that hard to find my program, if you will. I'm on Apple. I'm on Podbean. I'm on Spotify. I'm on Amazon Music /Audible. I'm on iHeartRadio. You can find me at Listen Notes, Podchaser, and you know what? And you can still find me over at YouTube. And that's just off the top of my head. Well, I did kind of cheat. I checked the Podbean listing. But I know there's others like Stitcher and Google Play. I think I might have already said that. But nevertheless, the podcast is easy to find, according to Callus, right? If you're feeling particularly motivated, you could rate or review the program. That would be doing me a major solid. It's not like we're charging. It's not like I ask for your money. I ask for a little bit of your time. So, here we go on with the program. All right. So, we've been watching things play out in D.C. For better, for worse, right? I mean, being out of work for several months myself, I feel for anybody that loses their job. I do find it interesting that people that thought they had permanent jobs in D.C. have to go look for work. Some of them actually voted for Donald Trump. I suspect the vast majority of these people will find work, or they will start businesses, or they'll just retire. I mean, how many of these folks had, been at a government job with an awesome retirement plan for 20 or 25 years at this point, and we're getting them off the payroll. They can go to their retirement, and hopefully they will stay out of government. The deep state is a thing. It is real, and it's not our friend. That's all going on while we are going through our semi-annual dance here in Austin. So there are a lot of folks that are rightfully annoyed that the Texas House keeps taking long weekends. And while I will tell you that I'm not a huge fan of that, I completely understand what's going on. They are restricted from doing anything that the governor doesn't want for the first month or so of the term. So if you legitimately have nothing that you can legally do, you might as well take time off. Now, I don't like it. I imagine the vast majority of my listeners don't like it. It looks terrible. I can't help but think these people are thumbing their noses at us, both metaphorically and literally at this point. But again, if you don't like something, you have to change it. You have to change the law or the Constitution, whichever it may be. And I got to be honest, I did not look it up. I don't know that it's a constitutional restriction. I suspect it's just the law. In either case, it can be addressed, but consider who it affects. Oh, that's right, the Texas legislature. Do you really think the Texas legislature wants to actually spend more time in Austin when they don't have to? I mean, draw your own conclusions here. Now, one of the things that we've talked about off and on, and that has been an issue ever since I got to Texas, is we have a part-time legislator. That is, they meet once every other year for essentially 4 months. Now, on the surface, that sounds fantastic. But there's some downsides, right? They conveniently run out the clock on things that they don't really want to do, but at least claim that they did something so that they can get reelected. And they repeatedly move the ball ever so slightly so that they can claim that it was a win, but they never actually deliver. So that you have to send them back again and again and again and again. Now, how do we solve this? How does this get addressed? Well, we could say your full-time legislator However, the session is still only every other year for 4 or 5 months, whatever the term may be. But you're expected to be available as a legislator. In other words, we're not going to allow you to have another job. We're not going to allow you to have a regular full-time job while you're a state legislator or state senator for that matter. In other words, when you get elected, this is your full-time job. You're expected to be there year-round, regular business hours, and have a staff that backs you up. Now, personally, I think whatever additional cost this would be appropriate. Now, fairly certain that we don't need to pay them $137,000 or $170,000 or whatever they pay congressmen. I imagine that, if we paid them $80,000 a year and that was their regular job, pretty much any normal person ought to be able to live on $80,000 to $90,000. Now, keep in mind, folks, this doesn't mean that they can't take a part-time job. It doesn't mean that they can't do side gigs. It just means they can't have a regular career on top of this job. So you can't work 2 full-time jobs unless you're going to be available for 8 hours in your legislative job, and then you're going to go work, 7 to 8 hours on another job, which gives you a 16-hour day, which is, I guess, feasible if you're 25 years old and single. Those of us that are older and have families know that doesn't really work very well long term. But I think we will benefit because, one, it makes them dependent upon their paycheck, which makes them dependent upon their voters. Now, in the past, I've referenced the notion that we could just set their pay equal to the median or the average, if you prefer, pay in their district. So that somebody that lives in Dallas or perhaps Harris County, where the cost of living is higher and there's, let's just say, higher paid people there, you could pay them the average. You could do the same with the Senate districts. You could theoretically pay less for a state representative or a state senator out in West Texas or even East Texas. So I'm not sure that's quote unquote fair, but it ties you to their people, right? So if you live, say, in Tyler, and your average pay is, let's say $60,000 for a well-paid person or a professional person. I have no idea what the average pay is out in Smith County, but just go with me here. Somewhere out in East Texas, the average pay for the constituents is between $30,000 and $60,000. We're just going to make up some numbers here. So you pay the state rep somewhere between that. Does the state rep really need to be making that much more money than their constituents? Wouldn't it make them feel their constituents' pain when they do the things that they do there in Austin? Wouldn't it motivate them to better represent their people? Now, once again, I know there's a ton of loopholes in this, and they will be exploited. Yeah, they're going to have a side gig. Yeah, they're going to have a secondary job. And that's all fine and dandy as long as they agree they can't have a regular full-time job on top of being a full-time state legislator or a state senator. Myself, I think that we would all benefit from that they would focus on that job. Now, there are some potential downsides to that. I'll be free to acknowledge that. And I would even go so far as to say the long-term benefits are going to outweigh the short-term costs. But again, keep in mind, the people that would be changing this are the people that are already there now, and they're probably not going to punish themselves, which is what this essentially would turn into, right? So if you are a highly paid attorney or real estate person, and you had to give up that gig in order to be a state rep, and now you're only going to get paid, let's say, less than 6 figures, you might think twice. Now, I suspect most of them will not, in fact, give that up. They will utilize all the loopholes, and they're going to then get, $80,000 a year or $60,000 a year or $40,000 a year, depending wherever they live, on top of that. And that's a possibility. But what it does do, is it allows for you and me and a lot of other people that can't afford to run and be a state rep because you would be giving up your salary. You can't have a real job and be a state representative or a state senator, but you could if you were going to get paid a decent salary or the average of where you live. And again, I'm open to that discussion. I'd like to hear it. And the other way that we could look at it is just say, we're going to do a Texas statewide average pay. And that's the max that we're going to pay for all the state reps and all the state senators. So if the average pay in Texas is, I don't know, we're just going to say $43,000. Great, that's all you make. But you should, in theory, be able to live off of that, except for a few areas where it's very expensive. And again, you'll have your side gigs and you can do part-time work and whatever else. And, most of us have spouses, or in my case, a wife that works. And so you need both those incomes to function. Just saying. The other thing it might do is it might cause them to consider what is the actual cost to their constituents once they know exactly how much they get paid on average and how that hits them. They might think twice. Now, I know that we've talked about the notion of this property tax, right? The property tax that is burying people alive sometimes. There's a number of different ways that can be handled. A consumption tax would be the easiest. And I know there's some people that think that's unfair. But you do have some level of control over what you're going to pay in a consumption tax. You have very little control over what they take from you with property tax. My personal thought is there's some kind of head count tax, right? You live in the jurisdiction and you pay a set fee to live in that jurisdiction. I mean, that's about as level as you can get across the board. But again, I don't know that there's going to be much temperament. I don't I don't know that there's going to be much interest in that based upon the temperament of both the legislature and the people. Just a thought. Okay. So in Texas, we are growing. People are moving here rapidly. Companies are moving here. And with that growth, some of these costs should go down. I don't foresee that happening, but they should. You can make an argument that more money should equal less money per person, but we'll just assume that we're not going to see that anytime soon. The other thing that's going to come with this is pain, right? There's going to be a significant demographic shift. And I'm not just talking about, hey, we're going to get a bunch of Latin people moving here. We're going to get a bunch more Indian people moving here. No, I'm talking about we're going to get a bunch more Yankees moving here. And it has been my observation that Yankees do far more damage than any other group of people. And I think mostly because they just don't understand that bringing that stuff with them is the problem. I'm just going to surmise that the Indian folks that move here love their home country. They love certain things from their home country, but they're ecstatic to be here rather than there. They want to bring a piece of home with them insofar as we want their food, their culture, whatever represented. But on the whole, they're really glad to be here. I will say with some level of confidence that pretty much every other Latin guy that I've worked with, whether they're from Mexico, Guatemala, Salvador, or further south, pretty much have the same mindset. We love our country, but it's better here, and we want to do well here. We don't want to ruin what's here. We don't want to kill the golden goose, if you will. I mean, they probably didn't explain it that way, but that's the way I interpreted that conversation. You understand that everybody sees what is available in Texas specifically, but the United States as a whole, and they want to be a part of that, and they're not looking to ruin it, except for the Yankees. And to be clear, Yankees don't only come from the Northeast. They come from California. They come from Nevada. Some come from Arizona, Washington, Oregon. Now, I know statistically we're quote-unquote gaining more red voters from those states that are coming here. And that may be true, but if that's the case, I don't know why it's a struggle to reelect Ted Cruz. Well, actually, I kind of got my own thoughts on that, but I don't know why they're so happy with the status quo. I don't know why they like these milquetoast moderates that tend to be running things. It would seem to me that they would be aware of the negative things from where they left and understand what the cause of failure or the cause of destruction was where they came from, and they would not want to repeat it here. But even those that vote red, if you will, seem quite content to have all the negative follow them. So I'm sure we've all been excited about big businesses moving here, and they bring their people here. So yeah, we gain jobs here locally, but we're going to import a bunch of people here too. And a lot of those people, they don't share the Texian culture, right? And to be fair, I think Latino culture is probably more similar to Texian culture than Yankee culture by a long shot. In fact, I would even go so far as to say that much of what I would just, for lack of a better phrase, use India or Indian culture is compatible to a degree with Texian culture than Yankee culture is. And I'm not going to have that long discussion and argument. I'm just going to surmise that for the most part, people want to be heard, but they also want to be left alone. Unless, of course, they're a Yankee, in which case they want you to hear them and obey them. And quite frankly, they're not happy until they've beaten you into submission. That's just something you want to keep in mind. So that's the pain that's going to follow, right? As successful as Texas may be and as many good things as may be occurring, there's a consequence. And that consequence is going to be borne by all of us. Just something to consider. I'm not trying to be Debbie Downer here, but it is the situation. So what is going to be the outcome of this, right? So I'm quite confident that as we watch the things play out over in D.C., some of that's going to carry over into Austin. That's my hope. That's my desire. How does that happen? Well, part of the problem is all the people that are currently elected have a vested interest in not changing anything. Right? I mean, they're very content. They're very happy. From the governor on down. Now, I have this conversation every once in a while, and I want to be quite clear on this. Our governor, by normal standards, is among the best governors in this country, in the United States right now. That being said, he could be so much better. I don't know that it's worth the time and energy to spell it all out or laying the groundwork for why this is the appropriate argument. I am just trying to get you to realize that the other states respect and like what our governor is doing. We're here, we live it, we expect more, especially the activists among us, right? It could be so much more, but he's not the guy that's going to do that. I don't know that we have the guy that's going to do that, even waiting in the wings. The closest thing might be the AG, but my suspicion is our current governor's not going anywhere soon. I imagine he's going to try for one more term. I'm not really sure why. I would have imagined he's achieved everything he wants to achieve, and he's got probably a wicked retirement plan. But at a certain point, when you get that power, you don't want to give it up. And again, I get it. I don't necessarily hate it because I understand it. But it would seem to me that it would be in your best interest, if you're a long-term governor, to always be moving the bar, to always be, aggressively looking to improve things even more than they currently are. How does that happen? What does it look like? I don't know. I don't know what the governor knows. And I don't want to second guess the governor because, quite frankly, I don't know what the governor knows. But I suspect that if he were to try, 10% of what's been going on in D.C., that'd be very interesting. Very interesting to see how that plays out. So let's see, how something like that might happen. I'm just going to guess the TEA, we should audit that. Just for starters. Perhaps when we're done with that, we could look at some of the other stuff after the State Board of Education. Maybe look at that, where they dispense funds, if anything. When we're done with that, we can look at how the Texas Rangers operate. Maybe we look at expanding the authority and the reach of the Texas State Guard. I mean, I'm a long-term proponent of Texas independence, and like I said, I'll settle for simply de facto independence, and I think that's doable if you build out our armed forces, if you will. So we're not fully dependent on the Army, not fully dependent on the Navy, that we're able to augment it. But I think all these things are appropriate and necessary for that future, but they have a vested interest in doing nothing. Now, maybe, next week I'll spend a little time kind of exploring what that could look like and what some of these revised offices might be in charge of. I think that might be fun. Little head scratcher there, but we'll revisit that in the future, I'm sure. But the thing that you want to remember here is the outcome, right? So we started off with the notion that we ought to consider what's going on in D.C. and look at how that plays here at home. We ought to consider whether or not it's a good idea to have our state reps, full-time state reps, not in session full-time, but full-time representatives. Now, some do better than others, I'm sure, but when you have to have a regular full-time job, you cannot be a full-time representative. You just can't. Okay, last point here. A lot of this boils down to follow the leader. We have a long-established track record in Texas where we claim to be the leaders of liberty. We claim to be the most conservative state. We claim to be leading the charge on, gun rights or whatever. But the reality is, no, we're really not. We're usually chasing the other states. Now, one thing that can be said as a positive is we're chasing a number of states. Now, Florida might be really good at a couple of things. New Hampshire might be better at one or two things specifically. South Dakota might be better in a different area, but we're chasing all those different states. So combined, perhaps we can make an argument that Texas is better when you combine all those issues, but we don't lead. We just don't do that. So, how do we fix that? Well, right now, potentially, we have a multi-person race to succeed Governor Abbott should he not run for another term. The first tier would be potentially Lieutenant Dan, the AG, and the Agriculture Commissioner, whose name is escaping me at the minute, but it'll come to me. Don't you worry. It'll come back to me. Those would be your top tier candidates to replace him if he should not run again. But then this is where it gets even more interesting. You have a U.S. Senator, John Cornyn, that by all rights ought to be hanging up his boots. So we're going to go off the premise that he does retire. Well, now You've got a whole nother scenario here as well, because you have another line of top tier candidates. So you probably got one or two of the U.S. congressmen that might want to throw their hat into the ring. You've got Lieutenant Dan, which may or may not want to throw his hat in the ring. Certainly, the potentially outgoing governor would want to throw his hat in the ring. Then you're looking at the AG and one or two other people that are statewide elected officials. Use your imagination. I mean, I could very easily see Red Flag Dan, assuming that his threat to Tucker Carlson doesn't burn him down. I could see that happening, where he wants to be the senator. So then when you look at the fact that you might get a new U.S. senator that's solid, if we could get somebody that's, 3/4 as good as Ted Cruz, as far as knowing the facts and the Constitution, and perhaps every bit as aggressive, and maybe 30% nicer or well-liked. I mean, I don't mean to dog on Ted, but he's got a reputation, maybe not entirely deserved, but it's there. And then we could get a governor that's a hard charger, right? Somebody that's going to push and pull and get things done. And quite frankly, what I'm seeing on this school choice is not encouraging. We'll revisit that, I'm sure, later this week. But if that's what you're going all in on there, Governor Abbott, I don't understand. I just don't understand. I mean, I'm sure somebody's going to throw together a theory and why, and it's about money or something, but of all the things that you decide to go all in on, your version of school choice just kind of surprises me. Just saying. And then if Lieutenant Dan steps down to run for either the governor or the lieutenant governor's office, now it gets interesting. Do we see the AG jump over to that, and that frees up the AG's office? Because we haven't even talked about who might all want to run for AG. But so if Lieutenant Dan's seat goes vacant and you got the AG that jumps for it, I don't know. Maybe one or two of the senators throws their hat in the ring. I could see Brandon Creighton out of down by Montgomery County down there somewhere. I could see him throwing his hat in the ring. I think he probably might even be the front runner, maybe, depending on what the AG wants to do. And keep in mind, this isn't necessarily who I like better than the other. It's just the likely outcome, right? I mean, I can pretty much make a sales pitch for anybody that might be considering. I just don't know how much my heart would be into it. Or there might be another senator or two that wants a piece of that. I could even see the Speaker of the House, if he wasn't Burrows, shooting to be the lieutenant governor. Just saying. It is also a possibility that, Ted says, I've had enough time in D.C. I want to come back to Texas, my beloved Texas, and I'm going to be the lieutenant governor or a governor. Now you got to look at who do you replace Ted with? Because initially he said he only wanted to do 2 terms. He's on his 3rd term right now. It's possible. I'm not sure that that's what's best, but I'm open to talk about it. And then, assuming you get the AG running for something else and he vacates his spot, there's at least 2 or 3 guys that I could imagine making a run for it. I would imagine Matt Rinaldi might be considering it. I think the other guy's name is Mays Middleton. I think I got that name right. And then, of course, there's one of my local guys here, Jeff Leach. I could very easily see Jeff Leach throwing his hat in the ring for AG. Just saying. So there's a whole lot that could happen here in the next election cycle, just depending on what a few key players decide to do. That leads us to great opportunities to improve our situation. I'm fearful that there's going to be a whole lot of people playing it safe. There's going to be a whole lot of pressure to stick with what you know. Again, I'm not enthusiastic about it. This is a giant opportunity, and I would hate for Texas to blow it. But that's what we're talking about, right? If you're going to consider putting Texas first, you have to determine who's going to be the best person to carry forth the torch of putting Texas first. There's been some movement on making quote-unquote America first, but why aren't we doing the same in Texas? We should be following the lead. There's a giant opportunity. I hope and pray we don't miss it. We don't mess it up. And this doesn't pass us by. And while we're at it, if anybody at the state level should catch a hold of this, one, I'm not picking a winner or loser there. Two, could you please investigate the sheriff out in Smith County? I mean, from what I understand, he's not interested in actually following and enforcing the state laws, much less the federal laws when it comes to immigration. I find that highly concerning. And from what I understand, the Texas Ranger that's assigned to that area isn't overly concerned about that either, because apparently they're considering retiring to become a sheriff's deputy in Smith County. So that's kind of a major concern to me. If we can't get our own house in order, how in the world are we going to lead the way? With that, this has been According to Callus. And yeah, I probably stepped in it. But until then, I will see you on the other side.
TexianPride.com is the destination for Texans who want to show off their love for Texas. We don't settle for mediocre. Our shirts are made from 100% high-quality athletic cotton. They're cool, comfortable, and designed to fit and flatter any body type. Follow us on Facebook and Instagram. Visit TexianPride.com for your next stylish Texas tee.